Welcome to everyone out there. I always really look forward to International Women's Day, the global day celebrating social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. The reason I look forward to it is because you always hear some incredible stories. So first of all, I'd like to start with Hannah, who's not so very far from me in Singapore. Hi, Hannah. You were the youngest and first women speaker in Malaysia, which is an incredible achievement. How difficult was it? Were you accepted by the other MPs? What sort of attitudes did you encounter?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for that question. When I was elected at the age of 34 in 2013 as the first woman speaker, we had a lot of duties for the speaker in Malaysia, and that includes ceremonial duties. And so we have 13 states, and I remember at the first gathering of all the speakers, the other colleagues were all male and senior in age. And at the protocol unit, when they came to me, because all the speakers were seated together, I was asked, if I was there as a wife to one of the speaker, because people just could not imagine a woman seated there together with a man. Ceremonial attire, the robes, our headgear, how do I design one that will make it look nice on a woman. So I had to go into all that details. But when the job started, when I was on the chair, I had to ensure that everything that they criticize women for, I had to avoid that. So I had to make sure that I did not speak in a high-pitched voice. When I'm angry, I make sure I don't yell and I'm not emotional. I must look like I'm in control. And so I had to be very conscious every time I chair the proceedings, making sure that if I can, I don't send anybody out of the house. And so in that 5 years, thankfully, because you're so mindful every time, don't yell, don't raise your voice, don't react because they want you to react. And so I survived that 5 years, and I did not have to send anybody out of the house. So those were my experiences in that 5 years. And I would say that generally among the state assemblymen, it was well accepted for a woman to hold that position.
That's encouraging to hear. But I love the idea of, are you the wife? Are you the handbag? Thanks very much. So Wai Wai is in Washington at the minute, and she's at the beginning of what's going to be a very long International Women's Day. So thanks very much, Wai Wai. She's very much in demand around the world, not surprisingly, given her history. Imprisoned for 7 years as a political prisoner in Myanmar, you've dedicated your life to changing the country's political system. Can you give us some idea of the role of activism in politics there? And also what inspired you to get so involved?
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you very much, Asia Society, for inviting me for this special event. I'm very honored to join you all and inspired to hear Ash's story, and then, of course, Hannah on her experience. So first of all, happy International Day. We are here today because of the achievement of the women in our history. And I pay respect and gratitude to all the women who work so hard to bring equality and human dignity in our society. And I also pay tribute to those women lost their lives and their dignity in doing so. As actually Lena mentions, we all know that the fact that the inequality, gender inequality is in many levels, and it's come in many forms as well. Let alone talking about inequality in social inequality, economic inequality, political inequality, and discrimination that women face. there are many society. Women are still targeted for, of course, family violence, gender-based violence, too, at some point, even targeted for sexual and gender-based violence, and use those sexual and gender-based violence as weapon of war. That has been happening in Myanmar. And so I just want to put up there, and we to have some sort of acknowledgement that this is happening. Going back to my story, I was just 18 years old when I was in prison because of my father's political activism, leading pro-democracy movement in the previous military regime and making alliance with the opposition leader at that time, the Nobel laureate, Aung San Suu Kyi. Growing up as a daughter of politician, I was quite aware of the repressive nature of the military dictatorship. However, it was only when I was in the prison I started to realize how women in Myanmar are treated very differently, how the corruptions, the political system, the economic system, the judiciary affect women differently. And they continue to suffer even if they release from the jail. How society treat these women just to become unjustly in prison, and as they go out and they become marginalized, and the consequences that women had to bear for in this repressive nature is way higher and serious than a man would bear. So I think it was when it opened my eyes and my mind and realized that how the gender gap in our society and the impact of gender, impact of gender and discriminations against women in the repressive society, let alone in open society and democratic country. But in repressive society, it's even more. And that's where I become, I said to myself that maybe that's when I become a feminist, even before learning about the feminist in the prison as a teenager. But I dedicated myself to be promoting equal rights for women, as well as understanding the Burmese political systems and corruptions. I make decision that to fix the political systems when I came out as a teenager, like having a big dream. But then I was released, luckily, after 7 years. It was in 2012 when we had so-called democracy transition. We actually had hope that we will be able to contribute to bring democracy in Myanmar. However, in 2012, when violence attack against the Rohingya occurred, and when the civil war against the Kachin in North escalated, and when I realized that all the ethnic area in Myanmar, apart from the urban cities, have been facing many more challenges than what we talk about democracy, then I put myself into the situation that I need to stand up and I need to speak up. So I joined youth activism with other political prisoners and etc. And then I founded Women's Peace Network when I realized there wasn't women and voices to really mitigate not just the repressive or uneven democracy that was introduced by the military, or a flawed democracy, so-called democracy only meant to maintain the military powers, but also alongside with that, this military regime using ethnic conflict to instigate violence against Rohingya. And the hate speech was so on top of the social media everywhere. And I started to realize there's a huge gap. And I thought as a woman, given the women voice and understanding on the conflict and the nature, the situations, if I speak up, it might mitigate some. And we were able to. So I started doing that, and that was when what inspired me. And I think since then I've been learning about activism and and actually empowering other young people to become activists as well, like by providing trainings and etc. Because I believe that it is only the activism changed the society in the history and today, from the ending socialism to the ending slavery to all society. It starts from the activism. So I believe in it. And today you see in Myanmar a lot of young people joining, hands together and standing up against very cruel military. And that's inspired me more to continue to believe in what I do. Thank you.
Well, it's a very impressive CV, what you've done so far. I think, the bravery of the activists in Myanmar all through the decades, really, but obviously in the last 12 months has really gripped our attention and inspired people all over the world. But you did mention that empowerment, I guess, and setting sort of examples and, inspiring younger people. And I have daughters now in their late teens and early 20s, and they've recently been empowered by a speech former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard gave in Parliament probably 10 years ago, the famous misogyny speech. And I think it's amazing how these things live on. They have a life of their own. But I'd like to turn to Zoe. Hi. And, that when Julia Gillard came to power, she had to deal with a crossbench that was middle-aged men. For those of you who don't know, at that time, there wasn't sort of a clear victor. So to form a government, she had to reach out across the floor and deal with these men. And the interesting parallel now is that we're coming up to another election, and there's a lot of speculation that neither of the two major parties will get a clear victory, and they may well be in the same situation of having to negotiate with a crossbench that could be made up of very strong independent candidates like Zoe. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think has changed in the last sort of, 12 years or so since that 2010 election in Australia?
Hi, Emma, thank you. And hi, Wai Wai and Hannah. It's lovely to be on a panel with you. Look, I think perhaps what's motivated this is what hasn't changed in that time. That landmark speech, the misogyny speech that you're talking about, got international attention. We had our first female Prime Minister grappling with the challenges of dealing with a crossbench and a minority government. And in many ways, it was a productive parliament, possibly because the major parties were forced into a position of negotiating with a crossbench to create some progress on intractable issues. I feel that since that time, we've regressed back into a fairly stuck or stalled two-party system where you have two groups of people retreating to their corners and arguing about things more than actually problem solving on major issues. And I think what you've also seen over that time, of course, is the international rise of the Me Too movement, some very high profile instances of harassment in our own parliament that have received huge publicity and have really shone a light on the lack of policy change in the area of gender equality particularly. But it's not only about that. And I think that a word that popped up in Hannah's remarks was accountability. It occurs to me that the equality conversation comes back to accountability. Who is accountable for the lack of policy progress on these things? Who is accountable for the continuing escalating rates of domestic violence, sexual violence, for example, in this country? Who is accountable for the continuing gender pay gap? Who is accountable for the lack of change on childcare policy and those sorts of things? And if there's one thing that is an umbrella issue among the people that I talk to in this electorate about change and electing an independent candidate, it's accountability. So it's accountability on climate policy, it's integrity in our parliament, and it's accountability on equality. So I think that, I guess, desire for that accountability that we don't see and haven't seen has motivated people like me who probably have got to a point of thinking, well, I can only shout at the television for so long. It's time to actually step up to the table. And as a foreign correspondent and a journalist for roughly 3 decades, I've spent a lot of time in the room where it happens as an observer, but this is a different role to actually step in as a participant. So that's a choice that I've made from observations that we're not getting progress on these sorts of issues. And as a person who is, I think, innately a collaborator, a problem solver, a listener, a doer, that I think those qualities lend themselves to a position on the crossbench.
Mm. I'll just pick up this idea of negotiation, I guess, and productivity in a political process. I remember interviewing Indonesia's Foreign Minister, Retno Marsudi, who said she was actively campaigning at the UN to nurture and train women as participants in peace talks, because history had shown that when peace talks are conducted by women, they get to a conclusion much faster. And that sort of got me thinking about the benefit that perhaps more female participation can have in actually getting to an end in politics. Okay, sometimes we forget that politics is actually about achieving things. It's about policy. It's about enacting change. So I'd like to sort of ask all three of you if you can see a link between increased female participation in politics and more productive politics. And Zoe, I guess, seeing as we sort of were already there, I'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, I think it's to do with injecting different personalities, different types of personalities and different approaches to leadership. And you've seen it happen in the corporate world, which is way ahead of the political world on this. When you get more women into leadership positions, you start to see shifts on higher numbers of women in particular leadership roles. You start to see shifts on how rostering is done to accommodate people with families. You start to see shifts on perhaps, paid parental leave and those sorts of issues. But I think it goes beyond that. I think when you look around the world at the sort of female leaders that we've had in recent history, you start to see that women govern in different ways, just as men do. But perhaps they do bring a more collaborative approach in some ways. Perhaps some women bring a softness or a sort of more of a listening ear than some men do. But then you also see other women step forward and be really tough in leadership positions and show also that they can match it with men in those positions. Just because they're women doesn't mean that they're going to be any softer, any weaker. You look at someone like Angela Merkel or Julie Bishop, our former foreign minister, who I think was an incredibly tough player on the international stage for many years in very challenging situations. So I think it's just to do with recognising that women can have a position at the table and can perform equally as well as men, but then bring feminine traits in some instances that men don't have, just as men bring masculine traits that women don't have. And it's the combination of those things, I think, that creates effective collaborative leadership. Why would you take 50% of the population away from the potential table of highly skilled people that you could have when you're trying to solve issues that affect 100% of the population?
Indeed, maths doesn't work out. And can I ask you, during your time in Parliament, did you have any conversations with any male MPs about this, about the fact that increased diversity can result in better outcomes? Was that a topic they were keen to engage in and had thoughts on?
I think they generally don't have a problem when you are not competing for positions.
Right.
But when you are competing for a similar position, you have to draw attention to the fact that we have different challenges. And I think for women especially, we multitask a lot better. And so when you talk about productivity, when we go out to a meeting, we are very mindful of the fact that I still have to go home and settle my 2 toddlers. And so because of that, I don't want to waste time in 5 hours meeting without achieving anything. And so we go straight to the point. And every time we have a meeting, it must be for a purpose, a specific purpose, and we must achieve the outcome that we want. And I think because of that, our meetings are definitely more productive. And so there is also the exception to every general rule. I have seen men who are equally productive in meetings, and I've also seen women leaders who will just carry on talking without achieving anything. So I feel that introducing young women to politics and giving them that early exposure will give them a cutting edge when they are in their 30s, in their 40s. And when they come to the table, they have more confidence to compete with the other men. And so definitely, I think increased women participation will increase productivity.
Great. And Wai Wai, can I ask your views on this and your experiences? So in the activism end of politics, did you see any changes perhaps towards the merits of gender equality at that level?
So in our experience in Myanmar, I feel like we're far left behind. Yes, we had a female leader who iconic leader, very charismatic, loved by majority population. I think I want to put a couple of things here. I agree with Zoe on women participations. Like, not all women can be the feminine or the greatest leader. I think it's important that we increase women participations in the table, in politics, in conflict resolutions, in peace building, so that we can bring our unique experiences and trait, and so that it can be addressed, the impact on the women, and the women experiences are being addressed when we are there. But we cannot just just say that all women can be the good politicians or can bring peace to the world. It's not actually simply true, but there are values in having more women in politics, because we are half of the populations. Our concern has to be heard, and our knowledge has to be included in the nation building, in building peace and etc. So I believe in that. But in Myanmar, apart from having high level female leader, we don't have enough women participations in politics, in peace building, or even in activism. It's partly because of the patriarchy systems we have is a bit more deep and conservative. Therefore, women does not often get access to those platforms to be able to do that. They have been cut off. Not a lot of women can be courageous and come out. It's extremely harder, and I feel like we are way behind in this regard. But however, women's group like us and many others has been pushing for women participations in politics and peace processes, we've been advocating with the previous government to have a quota systems, and with after the coup with the national unity government, and within the Spring Revolutions movement, to ensure women participations is there. Women are in the leading role in NUG or in NUCC or all of the new institution that has been developed after the attempted coup. Not only that, we are also drafting a new a federal charter for the new country, for the future country, and constitutions, where women's groups become very strong, and making sure that the women participation, the quota is there, and as well as these documents, the founding documents of the country, should draft in a careful manner with the gender-sensitive gender lens, with a thorough gender lens. And that's what we are doing. So I think that's what we can say we are proud of doing it. But on the other hand, women, the military in Myanmar has been targeting women in many, many ways, including with the sexual and gender-based violence. Just yesterday, a 40-year-old mother was gang raped by the soldiers, and 7-year-old daughter was killed, and she was killed as well. And this practice has been happening throughout the coup and before the coup against the ethnic minorities, including the Rohingya. So, we're talking about women participation, gender equality, women's peace and security. But I think there are a lot more serious issues that we have to address, including protections of the women and ensuring justice for the victims and survivors of this sexual and gender-based violence. And that's where we have to start. Then, we go step by step, or we go together without ensuring protections and without ensuring justice for the survivors of those heinous crimes. We might not be able to achieve gender equality anytime soon.
There is a question that's come through from the audience that sort of picks up on some of the points you've made there, Wai Wai. It's a question from Dominic Fraser, who's asking about, is there an effort to bring together women from all backgrounds, so from all the different minority communities in Myanmar together? What are the challenges of forming an inclusive activist community? I mean, you gave that horrendous example of the mother and her child, so clearly the focus, is on saving lives and trying to keep people out of jail. But long term, is this something that activists like yourself are thinking about the need for more inclusion in the community?
I think in a society which is extremely diverse, as well as had the social tensions and ethnic tension has been created. There are lots of prejudice, depending on which group you belong to, where you come from. The more marginalized you are, the more discriminated as a woman. So you have, for example, people like me face double, triple discriminations coming from the marginalized community, unwanted community, and being a woman, being a young woman. There are, many levels and layers of discriminations that we face day to day. And it is, while the society is so prejudiced against each other, especially against the Rohingya and ethnic minorities, it's a challenge that we are facing. It's a huge challenge. I think it is for us, it's a huge challenge and a big task unless we're able to change the mindset of the society that, the equality is important and inclusiveness is important for us to build a better future, to really achieve freedom. Unless we're able to create that mindset and change that mindset, it will be extremely hard. But right now, people like us and many others have been actually using the opportunity, when people realize the common enemy as military, and to fight against this common enemy and to build a better future. We're trying to convey the message to the wider audience that it is critical that we abandon prejudice, hate, and racism, and we work together to build an inclusive future for all of us by ensuring that bringing the most marginalized communities into the table, and also asking national unity government and the lead democracy leaders to engage meaningfully with for example, with the Rohingya community and other ethnic communities, not just for to use them for their political benefit, but also meaningfully engage with them and ensure that their participation is there and ensure that they have a equal future in a new country that we are building, including ensuring gender equality and inclusions of women from those communities.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. Oops, there's that word. Thanks, Wai Wai. Hannah, can I ask you on this question of inclusion? You were former Deputy Minister for Women, Family and Community Development. What's your view on what can be done to reduce the gender gap? And what do you think about, the Q word, about quotas?
I think it's important for us to identify the challenges that women face being in the workforce, and for us, closing the gender gap would mean providing them work-life balance, giving them equal opportunities to participate and to compete. And so we were looking into a lot of flexi working arrangement and flexi hours, childcare arrangement. But definitely when COVID hit, it accelerated the entire process because employers are now forced to allow their employees to work from home. Because of SOP, they have to cut short working hours in the office. And so I feel that I look at COVID as really as a factor to accelerate the entire process for us and also increasing the numbers of women in the workplace. And so I feel that COVID has definitely played a very positive role in helping us to close that gender gap here.
Wow, that's really interesting. Go pandemic. Finally, there's a benefit. Zoe, can I ask you, we've had a lot in Australia about this. There's been some, big report on what goes on in Parliament House and that the huge problems we have with attitudes towards women in Canberra, which must to a certain extent reflect what's the situation across the country. What's your answer to the very wide question of what we can do to increase equality and respect for women and girls in Australia?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're at the point where it's about enforceability. So we can't just keep talking around in circles on this because lip service gets paid to this issue. We hear constantly how much our leaders care about it, but they don't actually do anything to change it. And that's really why I'm sitting here talking to you today, along with several other women of my kind of age, I guess, who are stepping forward, putting themselves up to enter the parliament. And look, I think there are some fundamental things we can do. I think it's to do with a broad raft of things around provision of universal childcare that's flexible enough that all women can access that. So not just middle and upper class women who work 9 to 5, but those women who are working on fragmented rosters who need out of hours care to enable them to fully enter the workforce and to achieve their full potential. Things like paid parental leave and superannuation being paid on paid parental leave. So women don't go backwards when they exit the workforce temporarily because of child-rearing responsibilities. We need consistent national laws around sexual harassment. It would seem really basic, wouldn't it? But the laws across different states are vastly different, so the outcomes are therefore different and very inconsistent for different women. The main recommendation of the larger Sexual Discrimination Commissioner's report on harassment in the workplace was that workplaces should have to take responsibility for harassment rather than leaving it to the woman to report harassment. And of course, that goes to what I've already said, that not every woman is going to be empowered or have the agency to be able to report sexual harassment. If you're a single parent at risk of losing your job, you're not necessarily going to step up and report harassment. And you see even women in high profile positions who pay for the rest of their life for reporting harassment when they're the victim of the harassment. But for whatever reason, the imbalance is such that they become tagged with that. That needs to shift. And then also things like paid domestic violence leave for women's and people, so that they can exit a family situation that they can't stay in. And of course, then there's closing the gender pay gap, and that should be legislated. So there are structural things we can do. We just need to stop putting these things in the too hard basket and get in and do it. And then I think one thing that I'm quite passionate about that I think is really important is just revaluing care across our economy and really enabling women to reach their full potential by providing the supports that they need, so that they can somehow balance the multiple roles that we all have of our home duties and our work duties, and therefore providing things like childcare and also aged care. You know, we have a lot of women who are in the sandwich generation of caring for kids, sometimes caring for disabled relatives, and also caring for their parents. And these women are highly challenged by those sorts of things. So there are lots of structural issues in the system that I think we just need to tackle.
Yeah. Yeah. What about quotas for MPs?
Well, look, across Australia's two parties, as you know, the Labor Party has quotas, and the gender balance is vastly better than it is in the Liberal and National Party. So I think that kind of says everything. I know some people don't agree with quotas, but my argument with quotas is it's not elevating women beyond where they should be. It's just levelling the position so that good women actually have an opportunity to get to where they should be.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, do you think on the issue of quotas, are they politically acceptable in Malaysia now, or will it take some time?
We have talked about it for a long time, about 30% quota, but we are nowhere near. We have only about 14% right now of those elected in parliament representing women. But we have, especially my party, we have amended our constitution to say the central committee, we must have 30% quota set aside for the central leadership. And so at the moment we are testing all these things out. I am of the opinion, I agree with Zoe, you have to have quota to level the playing field. But the moment you enter the ring, I then agree that you need to allow them to compete on an equal footing. So, for example, if you are going to run for election and then when you have 30% of them elected into the House, when you are looking at the quota for the select committee, you are looking at how many women, how many male. I feel at that point, because you have already entered the scene, then we should stop using quota to justify why we should have more women in a particular committee. So yes, quota for level playing field, but once you enter, remove the quota.
Do you think quotas will be introduced in the near future, or is it still some time away?
We have talked a lot about it, but somehow they get away without following it. So I think, it's about legislating it. That would be the next step. At this stage, we are still talking about awareness.
Yeah, but no legislative, at least until after the next election, which is due next year, I think, is it?
Anytime now, actually.
Anytime now. Malaysian politics, you never know.
Yeah.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, actually only 1 minute, but I would just like to ask a question that I'm always a bit wary about asking, which is about how the role of children in your career. But I think because you brought it up, and I'll go to you, you mentioned, juggling toddlers. You've obviously been balancing young family and a political life. Is that been, obviously it's been a challenge, but is it also a source of pride that you have managed to do that?
Oh, definitely. I think in our regular conversation with children, it gives you perspective as to why you do the things you do, why policies are important, why you have to go out there and change it so that, they will inherit a better condition when they grow up. For me, definitely, I look at the COVID pandemic now as really a level playing field for women. Because of Zoom, we are able to do a lot more than, before this, I was very restricted from participating in a lot of events because I have to be home with the kids. But because of Zoom, now I am able to do 8 to 10 events if I want, just like my male colleagues. And I feel that is the level playing field now for us. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so I think I remember reading when you decided to run, you sat down with your family and ran it past them, and they gave you a very strong vote of confidence to go ahead. Can you just perhaps comment on that same question, you know, that the sense of pride you get from having it all?
Yeah, well, I don't think you can have it all at the same time. It's a case of trying to navigate your life where you have one thing at one time and another thing at another time, but trying to have both of them at the same time can be very difficult. I've been very lucky with a very supportive partner, and also, I guess, a financial position that's enabled us to navigate a situation where one person has been the carer for the kids while the other one has worked, and then we've flipped it around the other way. So we've had a very even relationship in that sense. And I think that's been great for the kids too, because they've been able to see the equality in action in our household, and that dad does the washing and cooks the dinner just as much as mum does, and sometimes mum works full time and sometimes dad does. So they've grown up with that, and I think that's then enabled them in this latest phase of my life to say, you have the skills to do this, go and do it. Someone really needs to do it for us. And in the end, it was my 15-year-old son who convinced me to run for political office because of the kind of representation that the kids want to see, and as Hannah said, because it's their future, not ours. So I was enabled by my children, which I guess validates the process that we've been through in bringing them up to the teenagers that they are.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So we are at time. So much as I feel like I could keep chatting to all of you for quite some time, it's just been such a treat to meet you all online and to share our conversation with the audience out there. So I'll thank you again and pass back to Lena.